Hi everybody, it's Laura. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made using a My Creative Scrapbook limited edition kit. This kit was from July of 2023, so it's a bit of an older kit. And I made this layout last year, but I'm just now getting the video up on my channel. I have a big, huge list of videos that have to get voiced over, and I'm not making as much headway in that list as I would like to, but I am slowly moving along and getting a lot of those videos up on my channel. I just wish I could do it a little bit faster. So I started off this layout with a piece of gessoed smooth white cardstock. I use Liquitex gesso for that, and I'm adding some sprays to the background. I used a whole variety of different sprays on this layout. I started off with an art anthology spray called Siesta. That was that first bluish spray that I used. And then I used a Prima Color Bloom spray called Brimstone Wings. That was that greenish color, the one that I'm actually using right now. And I'm creating a diagonal. I'm going to have my large photo cluster in the upper left-hand corner and then a smaller cluster in the lower right-hand corner. To choose the colors that I was going to use for my background, I looked at the pattern papers that were in the kit, and the pattern papers and the embellishments were from a gorgeous collection from Prima called Postcards from Paradise. I really liked this collection, and I thought it was a little bit different than some of the other collections that Prima has made. This collection has a tropical theme to it, which was perfect for some photos that I wanted to scrapbook that my daughter took when she was in the Dominican Republic a couple of years ago. I wanted the background to be lively. I'm just going to have the mixed media in the background. I'm not using any pattern papers, not even for a portion of the background, other than the border that I'm going to put around it later. So I wanted these areas of mixed media to be kind of exciting and have a little bit of liveliness to them. So one of the ways that I like to do that is to add a lot of splatters. So several times I dried my background and then went back in and added splatters in both of those colors that I've already used on the background. And then I also add a second layer of color in some places where I thought that the color was a little thin. One of the downsides to adding splatters is that the splatters can sometimes go everywhere. And some people like that, and I like that to a certain extent, but there are some times that I'll have a splatter in an area that I think it stands out too much. And although the goal is for all the parts of the layout to serve a purpose, I don't want the attention drawn away from my photo and my embellishments. So since there's gesso on the background, it's really not too hard to go back in with either a wipe or a wet paper towel and remove or at least tone down some of those extra splatters. And another thing that I love to do is add splatters of water. I haven't been doing this as much as I used to. I used to do this on every single layout. But I love the effect of splattering water on the area where there are sprays and then rolling a paper towel over the top, and it lifts up little droplets of water and creates what I think is a really cool effect. It doesn't work on all sprays, but it does work on the sprays that I used on this layout, and it only works if you have used gesso in your background. Next, I added some stamping to the layout. I'm looking at the finished layout right now, and I can't see any hint of stamping. I didn't want to use black because I loved the bright colors, and even though black goes really well with bright colors, there really wasn't any black or any dark colors in the pattern papers, so I thought I would stick with a blue color. And the only drawback to that is it's really not visible because the colors that I use for the sprays are so bold. But I did use a number of different stamps that I had in my stash, along with a Ranger Archival Ink in aquamarine, and I stamped quite a bit. Unfortunately, like I said, I really can't see very much of the stamping. I'm looking now, I could see one little dot or one little circle that's at the bottom of that larger area of color, but that's about it. But that's okay. Now the next step is the modeling paste. I'm using this Vicki Boutin stencil. This was included in the July 2023 kit, and it was perfect. It went along really well with the tropical theme of the collection that was in the kit. I'm using Liquitex modeling paste. Usually I'll buy a modeling paste and it's usually the least expensive modeling paste that I can find, and I'll use that until it's all used up, and then I'll buy another container. I think that most of the modeling pastes are very similar. The only difference is some of them are a little darker or grayer than others. So when I get a modeling paste that looks a little gray to me, I will sometimes add some paint in with it. And even when I have a white modeling paste, sometimes I'll add a little bit of white paint just because it makes it look a little bit more opaque. Now I'm adding some more splatters to the layout. I started off with a Shimmerz paint. It's a color splash spray called Sea Breeze. I thought that color went well with the colors that were already on the background. And now I'm splattering some watered down white acrylic paint. I like to keep the white acrylic paint in a bottle so that I'm always ready to add splatters, because I do add a lot of white splatters to my projects. The background is finally complete, and now I'm ready to work on some of the embellishments that I'm going to use on the page. I have a number of fussy cut pieces and die cut pieces from the kit. I have these beautiful leaves in pink and blue and some flowers. I also have a sentiment that says heaven on earth, and I cut out a circle that's just a little bit bigger than that sentiment so that it'll stand out a little bit. At first, I was thinking that that would be my title, but then later on, I went back and added a larger title just because I thought that even with the matte to highlight the sentiment, it was still a little bit more subtle than I wanted my title to be. So I inked the edges of all of those elements. I used a number of different colors of Distress Oxide. I used Victorian Velvet, Picked Raspberry, Broken China, and Bundled Sage. Now I'm making a mat for my photo. I'm going to be using a square photo. I have a white border around my photo, and then to make it stand out a little bit more, I cut out a square that was just a little bit bigger than the photo, and I used some Victorian Velvet to ink that mat, and then some Picked Raspberry to ink around the edge for more contrast. Now I'm using some Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White to cover up a little smudge that was on my white border. And then I cut out some foam to fit behind my photo to give it a little bit of dimension. I really love this photo. I was looking forward to scrapbooking it. I think it's so beautiful. It's a picture of, I guess, the resort that my daughter was staying in at night, and you can really see how beautiful it is there and all of the gorgeous lights that they have lighting up the, looks like the restaurant area and the pool. Now I'm ready to start adding all of those embellishments to the page. I am sometimes asked if I already plan out my layout before I start working on it, and I absolutely do have an idea of where I'm going with the layout before I start. However, a lot of times I'll find that the layout goes in a much different direction than what I've planned. I don't think you could ever plan a layout 100% because you kind of have to see how all the elements look together, how they look with your photo, and a lot of times I will change things around quite a bit. On this layout, the thing that I had to work on a little bit more once I had all the embellishments placed down was the fact that you really couldn't see the mixed media around that shutter die cut that I have to the right of the photo, and I wanted there to be a lot of mixed media visible because there's nothing else going on in the background. There's a lot of white space. So in a little while I am going to go back and add a little bit more mixed media. I popped up a couple of elements on the page, and I don't show the footage of me doing all of that because the video would go on for too long. But I did pop up a few things, like I popped up the parrots that are on the page. I popped up the spray of flowers that's on top of the photo, and also those little pink flowers that right now are kind of to the right-hand side of my layout. I end up moving those and popping those up on a little bit of foam. For the bottom cluster, I combined that large circle with the sentiment on it with some of the flowers and the parrot, and then I popped all of that up on foam, and then I layered it on top of some leaves and branches, and I think that that little bit of dimension helps the layout look a little bit more interesting. I always like a little bit of dimension, even though when you look at a photo of the layout, you really can't see it. It's something that I like to do. Adding mixed media after I've already added embellishments to the layout is always a little bit tricky. You can see that I have a piece of plastic on hand to cover up some of the elements so that I didn't get the sprays all over a photo or the die cut pieces. I did get a couple of little splatters on the shutters, but I think that it isn't super noticeable, and I am really happy that I added a little bit more color to the right-hand side of the shutters, because otherwise I think that the layout would have looked a little bit too plain for my taste. I had to go through all of the steps that I went through before. I added the sprays, I added some splatters, and I added some modeling paste. I didn't go back in with the stamps because, as I said, you really can't see those. Sometimes I have it in my head where I want splatters to be, and I can't seem to splatter them there. So when that happens, I'll take the straw from inside of the spray and I'll just dot the dots on the layout that way. And then I used the plastic once again, and I added some more splatters a little bit further away from the area of color, and I think that I have a sufficient number of splatters. I also added a little bit more ink to that parrot because I wanted there to be contrast between the parrot and the background. Now I'm going to make a little border around the outside of the layout. I cut my mixed media background back a little bit, about a 1/4 of an inch on each side, maybe a little bit more. And now I'm going to create a frame, and I'm going to mount my mixed media background on top of this frame. So I'm using some strips of pattern paper, and I'm using the 45-degree angles that are on this close to my heart mat. I usually fold down the corners and then cut along the fold lines, but this worked very well, and why not make use of a tool that I have right in front of me? So I attached down 2 solid strips on either side, and then for the top and the bottom I use those strips that I cut the 45-degree angles in. Of course, you could always just gut a piece of paper, but I like to use this method for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons is you can control the paper that's along each of the sides. You can pick out which strips of paper you want to be on each edge. And the other is that I'm still left with a piece of paper that's 8 inches by 12 inches that I could use to scrapbook, and I found that size paper is more useful to me than a small square or a smaller square that's left over when you gut a piece of paper. So I added some ink to the edge of my mixed media background, and then I added a lot of HGG adhesive to it, and then I attached it down to my mat. I felt that the cluster on the bottom could use a little bit more height on the right-hand side, so I inked the edges of this tag and I added that to the cluster. And now I'm going to work on my title. So I used the letter P that was included in the kit, and then I had these gold thickers in my stash. I thought that this color gold went really well with the gold accents that are on the pattern papers and the embellishments, and I spelled out paradise. I popped up the letter P using some foam, and then off camera I'm going to arrange those letters. It always takes me a long time to get those letters right, so I do that a little bit later on. I added some photo corners to my photo, and I used the same paper that I used to make the frame around the outside of the layout. I picked a spot on the paper that was a little more green for 2 of the corners, and then a spot that was a little more blue for the other 2 corners. Now I'm adding some white die cut branches into the layout, and this is something that I do all the time because when I have a really bright, colorful layout like this that doesn't have a lot of white in it, I think that the white helps to add a neutral in, and it helps to break up the color a little bit, which I think is a nice look. So I used a die that I had in my stash. I'm afraid I do not know the name of the manufacturer. I have lots and lots of leaf dies in my stash that are really old and are probably unbranded, but I know that scrapbook.com has a set of dies that's their brand, and it has a leaf that looks very similar to this, or a branch that looks similar to this with the centers of the leaves hollow. And at this point, I think I have enough leaf and branch dies. I'm not saying I'll never buy another one, but it would have to be something very different or very special for me to buy it now, because I did spend a lot of time and money buying branch dies back in the day, and that's the great thing about dies. You can use them over and over again. I still wanted to add more to the cluster on the bottom, so I found another group of flowers. I fussy cut that out from the rest of the embellishment, and I place that on top of the sentiment. And then I used a We Are Memory Keepers punch, and I punched out a little ring to go on top of the tag, but in the end you really can't see that because I cover it up with a bow. And then I always love to add some elements from the rest of the layout and put them near the title so that the title looks cohesive and that it goes along with the rest of the layout. So I added this pretty pink flower and then also some leaves to the flower. And then I added some pearls to the photo corner, something that I love to do. I love adding things like jewels and pearls to my layouts just because I think that it adds such a beautiful texture and it just makes the layout look more finished to me. Now I'm adding a few little jewels to the background. These are made by Angel's Crafts. They're called stone stickers, and they're very, very tiny. They're self-adhesive, and I think they add such a nice little touch to the backgrounds of layouts, so I add them quite a bit. Hundreds of them come in a pack. They come in strips, and I use my little scissors and I just cut them into individual pieces. I also added a bow to that tag, and the layout is complete, and here are some close-ups. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope that you enjoyed watching it. I am going to continue to try my hardest to get as many videos as possible posted on my channel before I have to return to work in September. So hopefully I'll have a lot more videos coming up for you in the next few weeks. If you're interested in becoming a subscriber to My Creative Scrapbook, take a look in the description box where you'll see a link to their website. I hope you have a fantastic day and hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.